Hello, this is Michael Robertson, Regional Environmental Health Specialist with the Food Protection and Facilities Branch. This presentation is designed to give an overview of the rules governing the sanitation of primitive camps. This presentation includes information about the rules and how to document violations on the inspection form. For this presentation, please have a copy of the rules governing the sanitation of primitive camps, which are listed under 15A NCAC 18A 3500. It can be found on the North Carolina Division of Environmental Health website. Please also make sure to have a copy of inspection form number 4061 to reference during this presentation. Let's begin by discussing the definitions listed under Rule 3501. A primitive experience camp is a camp that is not served by public electrical service providers, which is a very important characteristic because that is what differentiates a primitive experience camp from a resident camp and a summer camp, so keep that in mind. Primitive experience camp provides food and overnight lodging for 72 or more consecutive hours per week. They provide organized recreational or educational programs for adults or children. They have programs that are operated and supervised by camp staff. However, they do not include rented campsites or campgrounds. A primitive experience base camp is a fixed location containing structures, water supplies, toilets, and necessary facilities that are essential for the operation of the primitive experience camp. So taking a look at 3502, primitive experience base camp permit and approval of plans. Plans that are drawn to scale include specifications for facilities, a topographic map of the base camp, information on the water supply and wastewater disposal system, and sites that are located outside of the base camp that are used during the season. Plans shall be submitted to the health department when there are additions or renovations to existing facilities or when new facilities are built. Taking a look at Rule 3503, permit to operate, a base camp permit and an operation permit shall be issued by the health department prior to operation. So keep in mind there are two different permits that are associated with a primitive experience camp, one being a base camp permit and the other being a general operation permit, so keep that in mind. The operator is required to notify the health department of a change in ownership or operation within 72 hours. A plan of operation shall be submitted to the health department at least 30 days prior to permitting, which describes the dates of the operation and the number of campers expected, activities and programs that will be offered, food handling procedures and proof of food safety training, water supply and wastewater disposal systems that will be utilized, and solid waste disposal. In addition, a seasonal permit application must be submitted to the health department at least 45 days prior to opening. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you see a copy of the advance notification for seasonal operation form. The operator must provide written documentation including equipment for food temperature maintenance is clean and operational. Utensils and equipment are clean and sanitized. Cooking and lodging areas are clean and free of vermin harborages. Camp facilities are in good repair and clean, and operating plans have been submitted. In addition, at least 30 days prior to operation, a bacteriological water sample must be collected for any on-site water supplies such as wells. Keep in mind that transitional permits are not allowed for primitive experience camps. During the permitting inspection, permit conditions can be placed on the permit, which include the number of campers per session, the type of food served, use of facilities, restrictions on water and wastewater systems, and contractual agreements with outside vendors. This will be handled on a case-by-case basis. Keep in mind also that permits can be suspended or revoked for rule violations. So let's talk about a few things to do before we even go out on the inspection when we arrive at the site. Make sure before we go out on the inspection that we're reviewing the file for on-site wastewater and on-site water supply documentation. That includes knowing the location of the septic system, including the tanks and the drain field, what kind of septic system it is. Also, where is the well located, and what kind of history do we have as far as the previous water samples that have been collected with the well. In addition, we want to look for violations noted on previous inspection reports. We want to make sure we're able to follow up and verify that anything that was noted on the previous inspection report was either corrected during inspection or it has been corrected since the last inspection. We also need to know if there are any complaints or issues that have been reported about the facility from campers, family members, staff members, or the general public. We want to make sure we follow up if there's been any complaints such as foodborne illnesses, any hazardous or dangerous situations out on the camp, or anything else that we would be concerned about. Some of the basic equipment that you need to carry with you would be a flashlight, a thermometer with alcohol swabs or other approved method for cleaning and sanitizing the thermometer probe, an inspection form, and a set of rules to refer to during and after the inspection when we're writing up the inspection report. Some additional things that you might want to consider would be some loose-fitting clothing, comfortable shoes, because most of the inspection will take place outside. In addition, also, we suggest that you bring sunscreen and insect repellent if needed. Looking at Rule 3504, inspections and re-inspections. If the facility operates less than 6 months, then we're going to inspect it once per operating season. If it operates more than 6 months, we're going to inspect it once each 6-month period. So upon arrival, make sure that you identify yourself, state the purpose of your visit, ask for the person in charge, and invite them to accompany you on the inspection. At the end of the inspection, we need to complete the inspection report and review it with the operator. And we need to keep in mind that no grade card is posted for a primitive experience camp. So let's take a closer look at the inspection form. I have zoomed in on the very top portion of the inspection of a primitive experience camp form. So at the very top, you see a place to check whether the facility is approved or disapproved. You have a space to indicate the date of the inspection or change, the status code, the jurisdiction in which the primitive experience camp is located, and the facility ID. In the next section, you see a place to indicate the water supply that serves the facility, the wastewater system type, whether or not a seasonal permit has been issued, whether or not a water sample has been taken, and what type of visit has been conducted, whether it be an inspection, a re-inspection, a visit, a name change, verification of closure, or status change. Next section deals with the demographical information for the camp, such as the name of the camp, the manager, and the location and billing address of the camp. The next section deals with when the season of the camp opens, when it closes, the number of boys, number of girls, number of employees, the present number in attendance, and the maximum attendance allowed. Let's take a closer look at the inspection form. If you see on the far left-hand side, you see your item numbers. You see the heading for those item numbers. In this case, it would be specific requirements for primitive base camps, which that information is listed under Rule 3505. You have the individual item numbers under each heading. You have boxes where you can check yes or no for each item number. You have boxes that you can check whether the violation noted was corrected during the inspection or whether or not it was not observed. And finally, on the far right-hand side, you have a place to put your comments and corrections. So let's look at an example of an inspection form so you can kind of get an idea of how to fill this out. So we have items under food protection from 15 to 26. You can see for number 15, 16, 17, and 18, they were all in compliance. For shellfish under number 19, that was not observed. For number 20, they were in compliance. 21 and 22, they were not observed. 23, they were out of compliance. So we'll have a comment that will be associated with that, and we'll talk about that in a second. For number 24, we're in compliance. For number 25, we're out of compliance. So therefore, we are going to be out of compliance, but we see that they corrected it during the inspection. So we'll check that out in the comments here in a second as well. And then 26, they were in compliance. So let's take a look at the comments that we have associated with those out of compliance issues. Number 23, no food thermometer was provided for checking food temperatures. So that wasn't something that they were able to correct during the inspection. So we're going to note that on the inspection and educate the operator on the importance of having a food thermometer for checking food temperatures and ask them to provide one for us. For number 25, we noted that a staff member did not wash their hands before handling food after cleaning dirty utensils. Staff member re-washed their hands. So you can see we were out of compliance, but we did a corrective action during the inspection. So therefore, we noted that on inspection. So be very clear with your comments so that anyone who reads the report, such as the operator, anyone from the general public, or an inspector who may follow you on the next inspection, everybody will be clear on what was found and what was observed during the inspection. So at this point, it would be helpful to make sure that you have a copy of the inspection report handy so that you can refer to it, because as we go through the remaining slides, you can refer to where you would possibly mark these on the inspection form. And if you have any questions about where to mark things on the inspection form, reach out to your regional specialist. So let's first talk about Rule 3505, specific requirements for primitive base camps. All structures must be clean and in good repair. Bedding, if provided, needs to be laundered between users and in good repair. Garbage should be properly stored and handled. Toilet facilities must be convenient and provided at no more than 20 per campers and staff per toilet seat. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at how many campers and staff are currently at the camp and how many toilet seats are available. We need to make sure that sewage is properly disposed of using the 1900 rules if it's not served by a municipal sewer system. And we also need to make sure that it complies with Rule 3506 for field sanitation, which we will talk about in the next slide. So looking at Rule 3506, this deals with field sanitation for the primitive experience camp. So first thing we'll talk about would be any cookouts, overnight trips, and primitive camping activities are allowed. Written procedures for field sanitation standards must be posted or available for inspection. So the operator should be able to provide that to you during the inspection if you need to refer to that. And the camp must ensure that approved procedures are practiced and maintained at these with these field sanitation standards. So let's talk about off-site food handling. Written procedures for off-site cooking, controlling temperatures, and food protection measures must be provided. And if the operator decides to change those, they need to notify the health department within 10 days that those procedures have changed. So keep in mind that we are grading this facility using the 3500 rules and not the 2600 rules in the food code. So there may be things such as the next item as far as potentially hazardous food handling that might be different. So if you look at the screen, it says potentially hazardous food shall be stored at 45 and below or 140 and above. So of course that's different than what is required in the food code. But remember that we are enforcing the 3500 rules on the primitive experience camps. So we need to make sure that we are using the requirements that are in the 3500 rules and not trying to enforce rules on them that we have no authority to do. Continuing on, food must be protected from contamination. Coolers need to be provided with ice, and ice packs can be allowed to be put in those to help maintain temperatures. Potentially hazardous foods that are cooked off-site must be consumed or discarded within 2 hours. So just keep that in mind that there is a time limit on things that are cooked off-site, that they have to be consumed within those 2 hours. And stuffing and stuffed meats are not allowed. So that should not be a part of their menu when they're taking that out into the field. Continuing on with off-site food handling, potentially hazardous foods can be thawed using approved methods. Again, they can be in a cold holding unit that's 45 degrees or less. Remember, we're not enforcing food code here. We're enforcing the 3500 rules. So 45 is allowed here. They can thaw under potable running water not to exceed 70 degrees, or they can thaw simply by cooking. Unpasteurized egg products must be cooked before consumption, and there needs to be a thermometer provided to check potentially hazardous food temperatures. So those are part of the procedures that you will find for the off-site food handling practices. So again, reiterating the fact that the 3500 rules may have different requirements than what are listed in the 2600 rules of the food code. So just make sure that you refer to 3506 when you're looking at final cook temperatures and things like that. So let's look at the slide. It says 165 or above for poultry, 155 or above for ground meat, 150 or above for pork, 140 or above for all other potentially hazardous foods requiring cooking. So that's a little different than what we're used to in the other rules. And then 130 or above for roast beef and beef steak, unless it's ordered otherwise by the consumer, meaning that they're ordering it undercooked, raw or undercooked. So keep those in mind when you're talking about final cook temperatures of food using the 3,500 rules, and try not to let the 2,600 rules of the food code information bleed over into these rules. Offsite drinking water can be from an approved source, or it can be from an offsite source. Now, if it's from an offsite source, it needs to be a free-flowing stream, spring, or well. Still water sources are allowed if flowing sources are not available, and water must be clear and free of debris and organic matter. So how are we going to treat this offsite drinking water? Well, in 3506, it gives you that information. We're going to bring it to a rolling boil for at least 5 minutes. We're going to filter it to remove cysts and viruses with an absolute pore size of 1 micron or smaller. We can treat it with 2 parts per million free chlorine residual for at least 30 minutes, or a minimum of 5 drops of 2% tincture iodine per liter of water. If we're using tablets, we need to make sure that we follow the manufacturer's directions, and it must be used in conjunction with boiling or filtering. We can't just use the tablets alone. They have to be used in conjunction with either boiling or filtering, because we want to make sure we have that extra layer of protection to make sure that that anything that could be hazardous in the water has been taken care of. With utensils and equipment, we want to make sure that all utensils and equipment are clean and in good repair. We want to make sure that food contact surfaces are smooth and in good repair and made of approved materials. We want to make sure that multi-use eating utensils are assigned to one individual until they are clean and sanitized. So if we're going out on the field, a backpacking adventure, or we're going to go off-site camping, we want to make sure that if the utensils are being maintained separately and not being shared amongst campers. Treated water supply is can be used for cleaning of equipment and utensils. And unless sanitizing methods provided, again, we want to keep our multi-use utensils stored separately. We want to make sure our dirty utensils and our clean utensils are separate. As far as hand washing is concerned, we want to make sure the hands are washed prior to food handling. We need to have potable water and soap, and you see in the picture, this is kind of a man-made type setup out in the field, a simple, easy way of creating a quick hand washing station so that hands can be washed prior to food handling. Also, we need to make sure that any toxic materials that are carried with us on the camp outs or the backpacking adventures are labeled and stored properly. As far as waste disposal is concerned, we need to make sure that we have an on-site system that meets the 1900 rules, such as a privy. And you see in the picture is a picture of a privy, or what some people will call an outhouse. Written procedures for off-site disposal, so any type of backpacking trips or any overnight camps that we take out off the base camp, we need to have written procedures for those off-site disposals. And one of the methods is a hole that's 6 inches deep with a diameter of at least 4 inches. It's located at least 200 feet from surface water, and it's covered with soil to a depth of 6 inches. So that is a method that you can use for off-site waste disposal when we're out on the camp outs and on the backpacking trips and things like that. So keep that in mind. Sanitizing procedures under Rule 3507. Multi-use eating and drinking equipment must be cleaned and sanitized after use. We can use a hot water to sanitize, which means that the hot water needs to be at 170 or above, and you have a thermometer to ensure that it is at least 170 or above. and we submerge in that water for at least 1 minute. We can also sanitize with chemicals, and the concentrations for the chemicals are listed on the screen. Chlorine at least 50 parts per million, iodine at least 12.5 parts per million, and quat at least 200 parts per million. Now for these chemicals, the minimum temperature needs to be at least 75 degrees, and a testing method such as the one on the screen must be provided. Moving on to Rule 3508, Primitive Base Camp Water Supply. Water supply needs to meet the 1700 rules and be listed with the North Carolina Public Water Supply section. If you need information on what is required in the 1700 rules, those rules can be accessed and downloaded on the North Carolina Division of Environmental Health website. We need to make sure that a bacteriological sample is collected at least annually. Cross connections throughout the water supply must be prohibited. Hot and cold water must be provided to all areas where cleaning is required. Keep in mind there's no minimum water temperature for this. It just says hot and cold water, so keep that in mind. And the water supply must be adequate for all operations. So we should have a water supply that's going to suffice for all the uses and all of the operations at the camp. Swimming pools under Rule 3509. Swimming and wading pools shall be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained with the 2500 rules. So typically you're going to not see a swimming pool at a primitive experience camp, but if you do happen to see that, just keep in mind that that swimming pool or wading pool will need to meet the 2500 rules. And again, if you need to know what's required in the 2500 rules, those rules can be accessed and downloaded at on the North Carolina Division of Environmental Health website. Rule 3510, drinking water facilities. Drinking water facilities shall be provided. They can be a water fountain with a single sanitary angle jet design 2 inches above the mouthpiece. So it's kind of what you see on the screen on the right-hand side. They can provide bottled water, or they can have water pitchers. Rule 3511, food supplies. Food supplies must be from an approved source and inspected sources. Must be free from spoilage and safe for human consumption. Must be handled, stored, and transported to prevent contamination. And foods intended to be returned must be labeled and stored to prevent contamination of other food. So some of your camp kitchens are going to be very, very rustic and very minimal, such as on the screen, you see a screened cabinet at a primitive experience camp in the mountains of North Carolina that is used to be their pantry. That is where their pantry and their food items are stored. So some of the items are going to look very rustic and very unusual, but you take them on a case-by-case basis and just make sure they meet the rules. Milk and milk products under Rule 3512. Grade A pasteurized milk and milk products shall only be used. Mixing of cream and milk is prohibited. Bulk milk dispensers, the product must be sealed and labeled with the distributor name and grade. Milk must be properly refrigerated and do not submerge in water. So if it's stored in ice water, we need to make sure it doesn't get submerged underwater. And reconstituted dry milk may be used per manufacturer's instructions. For seafood under Rule 3513, seafood must be obtained from an approved source. We need to ensure that the source is listed on the Interstate Certified Shellfish Shippers List, that we have certification information for crustacea, and that shell stock identification tags are provided for shell stock. Shucked shellfish shipped and stored in clean single-service containers with required labeling and date should be provided. Reuse of shellfish containers is not allowed. So if we have shellfish that comes in buckets or containers, they cannot be reused or provided for the storage of other types of food. If we have any issues with any type of shellfish or shell stock, the shellfish sanitation staff is a good resource if needed. So this is just a quick review of what to look for on a shell stock tag. We have handouts available on our website to show you this information. Basically, it shows what we're looking for on the shell stock identification tags. Continuing on with seafood, 3513. Again, shellfish must be stored at 45 or below in mechanical refrigeration. Again, we need to make sure that we are looking at the 3500 rules when we are looking at food service issues, and we are not regulating facility using food code or 2600 rules. We need to make sure that the tags are maintained for at least 90 days. Approved shell stock washing facilities are required, and it cannot be conducted in a can wash. Now, reuse of oyster shells for serving food is prohibited in the rules. However, there was a law passed that allows the reuse of oyster shells to be used, which is going to be North Carolina General Statute 138-248C3. So 138-248C3. If raw shellfish is served, a consumer advisory signage is required. So this is the sign on the right-hand side of your screen that would be required at the Primitive Experience Camp if raw shellfish is served. So in Rule 3514, ice handling. Ice from an approved water supply, and ice is from an approved water supply and stored to prevent contamination. Storage boxes, bins, and containers are covered, clean, and in good repair. Any grinders, pans, or buckets are clean between uses. They're in good repair and properly stored. And ice is handled to prevent contamination, such as providing a scoop, and the scoop is being properly stored. Moving into 3515, food service employees. Food service employees must be responsible, and there must be a full-time employee that has a food service sanitation program certification, and they need to renew that every 3 years. So that's different than what is listed in the food code or the 2600 rules. In the 3500 rules, it requires recertification every 3 years. So keep that in mind. There should be no tobacco use while handling food and washing utensils. Hands must be washed prior to handling food and utensils, after visits to the toilet, and when necessary. And staff members do not need to work in food service while sick, or if they have infected boils or wounds on their hands. Vermin control on premises, Rule 3516. Pesticides must be approved and listed with the EPA and the NCDA and used per manufacturer's instructions. If there's animal stables on the property, they must be located separate from the main activity area, and manure must be stored to minimize the breeding of flies. (3517) Miscellaneous deals with any hazardous materials such as fuel and chemicals must be properly stored to minimize health hazards. Railings, fences, and enclosures must be in good repair. Rule 3518 deals with procedure when infection is suspected. When the local health department has reason to suspect the possibility of exposure to or transmission of infection within a food handling operation from any person or from any food or drink, the local health director shall act in accordance with the communicable disease laws and rules. So keep that in mind if we have infection suspected at one of these facilities. And Rule 3519 deals with informal review process and appeals procedure. Basically, it gives you the information on how to appeal. Appeals concerning the interpretation and enforcement of the rules of this section are made in accordance with General Statute 150B, and it outlines the process for requesting an informal review and appeal. So if there's issues that arise during the inspection, and the operator can appeal the interpretation or enforcement of the rules if they don't agree with it. So just want you to be aware of that informal review process and appeals procedure. And that is the end of this presentation. If you have any questions about this presentation, please contact your regional specialist, and we hope you have a great day.